The air over Ouagadougou was too still. Not the kind of stillness that brought peace, but the kind that curled under the skin and whispered, "Something is watching you." It was midnight, but the stars had hidden. Even the dogs, so quick to bark at shadows, had fallen mute. The street vendors had packed their things early. The women who normally laughed by the roadside fires had gone silent without knowing why. Inside the presidential compound, Ibrahim Traoré stood by an open window, dressed not in his uniform, but a plain moss-green shirt and black trousers. He didn't need medals to feel the weight of the revolution on his shoulders. He listened, not with ears but with something deeper. There was again the silence of a drum refusing to speak. He had grown up in Bobo Dioulasso, a boy running barefoot across sunburnt roads, listening to the griots who told stories in circles lit by oil lanterns. They always said, "When the ancestors go quiet, it's because something unnatural is walking in your midst." And tonight the silence was deafening. Traoré turned away from the window and walked to the map laid across his wooden war table. Every inch of Burkina Faso was etched into his memory, from the mines the French once hoarded, to the northern borders the terrorists tried to bleed. His fingers moved across it like a prayer. There was a breach. Not in borders, but in trust. The wind did not speak that night. Ouagadougou slept under a sky smothered in red Saharan dust. The stars were buried. The moon hung above like a coin placed on the eyelids of a corpse. There were no barking dogs, no radios echoing high-life rhythms through alleyways, no last-minute footsteps from lovers racing home before curfew. Only silence. President Ibrahim Traoré stood alone in the darkness of his study. The mahogany floor creaked softly beneath his boots. A single candle flickered on the wide desk where reports sat, untouched dossiers, border surveillance, economic updates, French sanctions, ECOWAS murmurs, but all of them were irrelevant tonight. Because the ancestors had gone quiet. And that, to a son of the Mossi people, meant something more dangerous than bombs or betrayal. As a child, he had once asked his grandmother, "Naya, how do you know when a bad spirit has entered the village?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she'd sat in the dust, mixing millet with honey and ground cola, and finally whispered, "When the baobab stops breathing. When the drums go mute. When even fire loses its warmth. That's when a stranger wears the skin of a brother." Tonight, the drums had fallen silent. That was all the intelligence he needed. His name was Daniel Mercer. At least that's what his passport said. He wore crisp suits that looked too expensive for someone claiming to work in post-conflict stabilization. His French was polished but neutral. His handshake firm but forgettable. His eyes a pale, unreadable blue. The kind of man who could enter a room and be invisible 5 minutes later. He'd arrived 6 months ago through an NGO supposedly focused on counterterrorism partnerships in the Sahel. A diplomat's handshake brought him into the inner advisory circle under the pretense of technical support. He offered policy suggestions, statistics, even maps of terror networks that Burkina's own intelligence had missed. Too precise, too good, and too curious. Mercer had an unusual talent, being where he wasn't supposed to be. Sitting in on meetings no one recalled inviting him to. Asking questions wrapped in compliments. Always nodding. Always taking mental notes. At first no one questioned it. But Traoré had survived more than one ambush by recognizing a hunter's silence behind a smile. The dream came again. The griot stood by a smoldering baobab tree, eyes whited out like marbles dipped in ash. His mouth moved but made no sound. Beside him stood a tall figure in a white mask shaped like a hyena's skull. The figure held a scroll made of dried skin, dripping blood onto the roots. Traoré stepped forward in the dream. But the griot simply pointed to the scroll. Words burned into it like fire in old bark. "The man behind you is not yours. His tongue is borrowed. His loyalty has no roots." The wind screamed and he awoke in his bed, heart pounding. Sweat soaked his spine. Not from fear but from certainty. Mercer was not who he claimed to be. In the heart of the presidential compound, beneath layers of concrete and soundproof stone, there was a room known as Cora Hall, built not for music but for secrets. Inside, Traoré met with 3 trusted individuals. Colonel Zinaba, head of Burkinabe intelligence. General Mariam Ouedraogo, decorated veteran of the northern offensives. And Maman Abe, a spiritual elder from Tibel, known to read signs in shadows and river foam. The room was lit only by a circle of lanterns and the scent of burning shea bark. Traoré spoke without ceremony. "There is a serpent in the courtyard. He wears a foreign flag in his blood." Zinaba narrowed his eyes. "Mercer?" Ouedraogo frowned. "We've traced nothing suspicious. No leaks. No wire transfers. But Maman Abe, who had said nothing, took a cola nut, split it with her teeth and dropped the halves on the dirt floor. They landed with one upright and the other face down. She nodded slowly. He walks with two names. One is a lie. The other belongs to the one who sent him. The room fell into silence deeper than death. Traoré leaned forward. Then we must make him show his true name. A plan was born, not of steel but of strategy. They would bait the fox. Traoré had the perfect lure. A false diplomatic memorandum suggesting Burkina Faso was preparing to lease uranium fields to a coalition of East African and Asian nations, specifically naming North Korea, a diplomatic lightning rod. The document was marked top secret and subtly planted in Minister Candace's red folder, which Mercer would have access to during security consultations. If Mercer was a true advisor, the memo would remain unseen. If he was a spy, the leak would ripple through Western intelligence within days. They gave it 72 hours. It took 41. On the third night, Zinaba intercepted encrypted chatter from a listening post outside Kédougou. A signal bounced from an uplink that matched the pattern of known NATO ops in Dakar. Keywords were like blood on a white robe. Traoré, uranium, destabilize, extraction protocol, expedited. Zinaba dropped the transcript on the president's desk. He took the bait. The jackal just exposed its own footprints. Traoré didn't smile. He closed the folder slowly, then whispered, "Prepare the room. It's time to remove his mask." The sun was high, but the air in the presidential courtyard was heavy with storm tension. Mercer was invited to a private briefing in Chamber Yanenga, named after the legendary warrior princess. He entered alone, expecting another routine update. Instead, he found Traoré seated in full military dress, flanked by General Ouedraogo and Colonel Zinaba. No smiles. No tea. No folders. Just eyes. Mercer paused. "Mr. President, I wasn't expecting." Traoré raised his hand, silencing him. He gestured to a chair. "Sit." Mercer obeyed. A long silence followed, long enough for sweat to bead behind Mercer's ears. Traoré leaned forward, voice low and razor-sharp. "In the Sahel, a hyena does not kill by speed or strength, but by patience." He slid a copy of the fake memorandum across the table. "Why did this end up in a NATO wiretap?" Mercer blinked. "What? Twice? I don't know what you mean. Perhaps your minister." Traoré's eyes hardened. "Do not insult me." Then in Diola he said, "The jackal thinks we are blind because we walk slowly. But the dust remembers every footprint." Mercer opened his mouth again, but Zinaba stepped forward. A small device was placed on the table. A recording. They played the encrypted audio. The voice was distorted, but Mercer's accent was unmistakable. Code words. Confirmations. Proof. Caught. Mercer didn't panic. His body went still. Cold. Calculating. "You have no proof of who I work for," he said evenly. Traoré stood. "I don't need proof for those who walk without roots. I don't need papers to know a traitor. My ancestors taught me how to smell betrayal." Mercer's mask cracked. His composure faltered just slightly. But enough. He reached toward his wrist, where a thin transmitter was hidden under his watch. Too late. Ouedraogo crushed it with her boot. "No one is coming to save you." Traoré stepped forward, so close Mercer could smell the shea oil on his uniform. "You'll be put on a plane at dawn. No press. No scandal. But let your handlers know." He paused, voice like iron. "Africa is no longer their chessboard. We are not pieces. We are the hand that flips the board." As Mercer was escorted out, bound for exile, a flock of starlings burst into the sky. Free. Uncaged. Screaming warnings only the wind could understand. That night, in the alleys of Ouagadougou, the drums returned. Not loud. Not yet. But steady. Like a heartbeat. Like a whisper becoming a roar. Traoré stood on the balcony once more. No longer alone. The baobab in the courtyard rustled. And somewhere deep in the ancestral dreamscape, the griot finally smiled. Even with Mercer gone, the air did not clear. The spy was only a branch, not the root. Traoré sensed it, like an itch behind the soul. Maman Abe confirmed it during her dawn reading, casting cowries across woven straw. "The vulture did not fly here alone," she murmured. "A second beak waits, silent. This one speaks our tongue, bleeds our soil, but walks for the enemy." That was worse. A traitor inside the palace. Traoré's face didn't change, but his heart slowed like a hunter holding breath. Betrayal from a foreigner was warfare. But betrayal from a son of the land, that was spiritual treason. Traoré summoned Zenaba privately. "I want eyes in every hall, every file, every whisper," he ordered. "No official protocol. No paper trail. This ghost bleeds Burkinabe colors." Zenaba nodded. "Silent protocol?" "Silent protocol," Traoré confirmed. Thus began Operation Wari-Wiri, the name given to forest spirits who travel unseen but whose presence makes lions flee. Zenaba selected 7 agents from the elite Seko unit, trained in deep surveillance and loyalty beyond blood. Their orders: trust no one. Not even ministers. Not even generals. In 7 days the walls of the presidency grew eyes. The breakthrough came in the most unexpected place: a prayer room. It was Colonel Zenaba who noticed the subtle shift. Every Friday high-ranking officials were invited to pray in the small ceremonial mosque inside the palace. On the wooden shelf rested a sacred set of amber prayer beads passed down since the days of the Volta Confederacy. No one touched them. It was tradition. But after one Friday afternoon, Zenaba noticed something odd. A faint smudge on bead number 11. Oil residue fresh. A fingerprint. Lab scans confirmed it. General Wemba Diallo. General Diallo had served 3 regimes. He had a soldier's record: victories in the north, negotiations with tribal militias, survival under pressure. But there was always something slippery. He never picked sides too early. Never gave full allegiance. Always a diplomat in uniform. Traoré had kept him close, but never too close. Zenaba now delivered a profile built over years: Diallo's niece married to a French consul. Multiple untraceable shell companies in Cotonou. Travel patterns matching 3 intelligence summits in Europe. Private encrypted messages that didn't match his public calendar. The pieces clicked. He wasn't just a traitor. He was Mercer's original handler. The American was the distraction. Diallo was the true operative. Traoré did not rage. Instead, he summoned the spirit of Sundiata Keita, warrior king and master strategist. "To kill a snake you do not chase it," he told Zenaba. "You let it think it is safe. Then you offer it a mirror." They prepared a fake military report. A fabricated map of gold and lithium reserves buried beneath Burkina's southern border, marked with secret foreign interest: Chinese, Russian, American. It was placed inside a secured intelligence vault. Only 4 people had access: Traoré, Zenaba, General Ouedraogo, and Diallo. Then they waited. 3 nights later, Zenaba intercepted a data packet routed through the Togolese diplomatic relay. The report had been leaked, word for word. The transmission pinged servers in Lyon, disguised as corporate chatter. Proof. When Traoré saw the full trace, he closed his eyes. "The vulture nests in our own rafters." He summoned Maman Abe. "What punishment does the land require when a child feeds the enemy?" She answered without blinking. "Strip him of his name. Let the people see. Then let the land choose." Traoré called a national press briefing. The room pulsed with tension. Journalists packed shoulder to shoulder. Live feeds streamed across Africa. General Diallo stood by the president's side, stoic in his decorated uniform. Traoré opened with calm precision. "Burkina Faso has been hunted by foreign wolves for decades. But sometimes, the wound is made by a brother's knife." He turned to Diallo. "General, do you deny transmitting state secrets to foreign agencies?" Diallo froze. The silence screamed louder than any answer. Cameras zoomed in. Flashes exploded. Finally Diallo spoke. "I did what was necessary to balance this country's survival. No apology. No regret. Just calculation." Traoré replied with steel in his voice. "Then you are no longer of this country." In full view of the nation, Traoré stepped forward. He reached for Diallo's ceremonial sash, red, gold, and green, and tore it from his shoulder. He removed the star medallion. He placed it on the table. Then, in Diola, he said, "You are no longer general. You are no longer Wemba. You are nothing but the wind's slave." 2 guards escorted Diallo away, silent as ghosts. Burkina Faso erupted. Across villages, towns, cities, people gathered in streets. Not in chaos but in ceremony. Women burned leaves of the soma tree for purification. Griots sang epics of warriors who had unmasked traitors. Children painted their faces with red clay in honor of vigilance. Traoré had done something more powerful than punishment. He had awakened memory, the ancestral instinct to defend what was sacred. Within 48 hours, Traoré's secure line lit up. The voice was from Brussels. "Mr. President, there are concerns about how the situation was handled. General Diallo had relationships with partners in our defense initiatives." Traoré chuckled softly. Then perhaps you should choose better partners. Another voice, this time Washington. We recommend diplomatic mediation. Traoré's tone darkened. We do not mediate betrayal. We bury it. Then he hung up. No fear. No apology. That night in his dreams the griot returned. This time no bleeding mask. No ash. Just firelight and drumming. You saw the invisible, the griot said. You heard what was not spoken. He handed Traoré a spear made of ironwood. Keep it. There will be more. Traoré nodded. Let them come. We no longer bow. In the following weeks, Traoré instituted sweeping reforms. A new internal agency called Ancestral Shield was born, blending modern cyber warfare with traditional surveillance rooted in trust, family lineages, and loyalty bonds. Burkina would no longer rely on security partnerships that required foreign signatures. They would become their own shield. As Maman Abe whispered, when the lion sharpens its own teeth, the jackals flee. Elsewhere in Africa, something stirred. In Mali, Chad, Niger, young officers and ministers watched footage of Traoré confronting Mercer. They shared it, translated it, played it in schools, on WhatsApp, even in mosques. One phrase echoed across borders. We are not pieces. We are the hand that flips the board. The words had become revolutionary scripture. General Diallo never made it to his exile compound. En route to the northern border, his convoy was intercepted by armed horsemen, faces veiled, weapons handcrafted. They did not shoot. They simply handed a scroll to the escort commander. On it was written, "This land does not shelter traitors." Diallo vanished. No body. No grave. But in Taibo, beneath the moonlight, the river whispered something only the griots understood. The land has judged him. Months passed. Foreign spies still tried. Corporations still whispered in embassies. But now they faced a wall of silence. Not because Burkina had closed itself off, but because the people had opened their eyes. They no longer feared the foreign shadow. They had seen a lion in their own skin. And his name was Ibrahim Traoré. The dust of the Sahel carried more than wind. It carried rumors. Traoré's purge of General Diallo had not only cleansed his inner circle, it had sent tremors through regional networks of spies, profiteers, and puppets. French intelligence quietly froze 2 of its operations in West Africa. American assets went dark in Ouagadougou. Even ECOWAS ministers began to watch their own shadows. But in the shadows of Djibo, a rogue agent whispered into a sat phone. Phase 2 is active. Plan Delta begins now. In Brussels, in Washington, and in the expat lounges of Accra, new orders were issued. It came silently. First, a sudden change in customs policies at the port of Lomé, disrupting Burkinabe imports. Next, a cascade of financial freezes, funds marked as under review by international banks. Then a flood of media attacks, headlines from France 24, Reuters, and the BBC questioning Traoré's authoritarian behavior, his anti-Western stance, and his unverified detainment of a military hero. This wasn't war with bullets. It was war with paper cuts, designed to bleed a nation dry without firing a shot. But Traoré did not break. He summoned his economic advisors and replaced imported goods with local cooperative production. Farmers were paid directly by the state in gold, bypassing frozen accounts. He built trade corridors with Mali and Guinea, forming what foreign diplomats soon called the anti-colonial triangle. And when reporters hounded him at a regional summit, he stared into the cameras and said, "You do not own the definition of democracy. You only own the printing press." One night, in the northern province of Yaga, a shepherd heard a humming sound. Above the hills, a drone appeared, black, unmarked, circling for hours. Within a week, 2 military outposts were hit by precise mortar fire. A convoy delivering mining equipment was ambushed with knowledge of its exact route. The patterns were too clean. Zinaba studied satellite logs and cross-referenced regional drone frequencies. One stood out. "It's Israeli-made," he said, "but operated from a base in Niger. Possibly outsourced. But the funding link leads back to a European private security firm." Mercer had been the mask. Diallo had been the bridge. But now Traoré was staring at the hand behind the curtain. Traoré called a midnight council, not in the palace, but in a secret room beneath the National Archives. Present were only 5 people: Zinaba, Maman Abe, Minister Sow, Defense, Minister Koita, Energy, and Fadil, the nation's most discreet cyber tactician. Zinaba laid the map bare: the drone path, the attack times, the satellite synchronization, the funding trail. Then Fadil added one more layer. "They are also hacking our civil network. Slowly. Testing vulnerabilities. They're preparing a cyber blackout. Traoré leaned forward, his voice a whisper of iron. Then we will give them a storm they cannot contain. Anansi, the name of the West African spider trickster who spun webs to trap the arrogant. That was the name of Burkina's new protocol. Fadil designed a trap, a false server mimicking the entire government network, filled with fake troop deployments, fake budget flows, fake satellite coordinates. It was plugged into the cyberstream and left open. Just vulnerable enough. Just tempting enough. Within 72 hours, the hackers bit. They downloaded 42 gigabytes of fabricated data. And based on that information, they launched Operation Nightfall, an attempted raid on a hidden uranium cache in the province of Kamanjori. Except, there was nothing there. What they found instead were 3 empty trucks rigged with trace beacons. The beacons led the trackers. First to a logistics office in Niamey, then to an unmarked compound just outside Lisbon. Lisbon, Portugal. NATO territory. Through satellite interception and international backchannel surveillance, Fadil confirmed the operator. Sovereign Sphere, a private military and intelligence contractor staffed by ex-CIA, ex-Mossad and French DGSE veterans. Their client? A coalition of European mineral companies with licenses they were about to lose due to Traoré's nationalization plan. The theft of sovereignty wasn't ideological. It was economic. Traoré wasn't resisting ideology, he was blocking greed. 2 days later, Traoré stood before the African Union. Wearing traditional Faso Dan Fani with no French translator by his side, he spoke in clear, echoing Diola. They do not fear our weapons. They fear our awakening. They fear a nation that no longer needs their papers, their stamps, their debt. They fear a black child who can trace his family history past slavery, back to kings. And above all, they fear a leader who does not flinch when the sky darkens. Let them fear. For the sky now speaks our name. When translated, the room fell into thunderous applause. 3 weeks later it happened. A silent figure scaled the palace wall. No fingerprint. No breath. Eyes cold as stone. A hired killer from Serbia trained to impersonate domestic guards. He entered through the kitchen corridor. Zinaba caught him 2 steps before the private presidential quarters. There was no negotiation. No name. Only a fight of bone and blade. The assassin's blade found Zinaba's arm. Zinaba's dagger found the man's throat. He died without revealing a word. But stitched into the inner lining of his boot was a code. LPT 429B. Fadil cracked it. It was a contract number, signed off by Sovereign Sphere HQ Lisbon. This wasn't politics anymore. It was war. Traoré gathered his new cabinet. We will not wait to be picked off one by one. We create silence around the enemy. Total silence. He activated a doctrine long kept secret, black silence. It authorized coordinated digital erasure, tracing the personal accounts, transactions and operations of every identified asset tied to Sovereign Sphere and their sponsors. Within days, 12 shell companies vanished. Their websites redirected to a single message in French, English and more. You played a deadly game. The spider always wins. Just when the West expected Traoré to stand alone, new voices emerged. From Bamako, Assimi Goïta released a public statement. Any threat to Burkina Faso is a threat to Mali. From Conakry, Guinea's leader pledged joint defense protocols. Even Eritrea sent envoys. And shockingly, from afar, Venezuela, Iran and North Korea requested economic dialogue. The West had tried to isolate Traoré. But instead, they'd drawn a circle of resistance. In the quiet of dawn after the storm, Traoré stood alone on the palace balcony. The air was cool. The horizon painted with hints of gold. He closed his eyes. And the griot returned, not as a ghost but as a man standing beside him. You turn the page, he said. But they still read from the old book. Traoré nodded. Then we must write a new one. The griot smiled. Then let it begin with a king who saw the spider's web, and chose to weave a greater one. Under the cover of dusk, deep within the Burkinabe highlands, a hidden fortress, Kuruma Base, came alive. Its walls were carved into red stone, shielded by forest and folklore. Here, Traoré summoned his most trusted commanders, regional allies and underground strategists. Zinaba, still healing, stood with a bandage on his left arm but fire in his voice. We know who the enemy is now. They no longer wear uniforms. They wear contracts. Traoré nodded. And contracts can be burned. Before them, a 3D table lit up, maps of Africa overlaid with enemy influence networks. Shell companies, proxy firms, media hubs, political agents, and covert supply chains. Mali's Goida leaned in. You sure this is accurate? Zanaba tapped the central node. As sure as the grave. The mission was clear. Decapitate the network, not just the head. The first strike wasn't military, it was mythological. Fadil deployed Project Black Root, an AI-driven cascade that overwhelmed enemy data centers using encrypted West African ancestral symbols. Glyphs, patterns, tonal scripts. Foreign systems couldn't decipher them, let alone block them. For 72 hours, banking systems in Belgium and Luxembourg glitched. Private security communication channels froze. And sovereign spheres' digital infrastructure collapsed into black static. A single message blinked across their screens. When you cannot read the drum, you do not hear the war coming. In a quiet village near Dori, an old Mossi priest approached a mobile unit commander. He carried a worn book, older than colonization, bound in red leather. Tell your president, he said, that the symbols in the sky have returned. The same ones from when the first kings fell. Inside the book were celestial maps, the same symbols Fadil had just used in Project Black Root. Glyphs passed down through oral tradition, now powering cyber warfare. History was not dead. It was alive, encrypted, and finally fighting back. In Ghana's capital, a Western diplomat attempted to reroute millions in bribes disguised as development aid to Burkinabe opposition figures. But before the transaction was complete, a silent alert triggered. Koita, Burkina's Minister of Energy turned shadow diplomat, had infiltrated the transfer channel. Within hours, the funds were rerouted into a humanitarian network feeding families in Kaya. The would-be political traders woke up to headlines praising Traoré's government for unexpected outreach and grassroots revolution. The weapon they tried to use, money, was now feeding the very people they wanted to turn. But not all battles were won abroad. Within the Ministry of Justice, a man named Cabaret, long suspected of harboring loyalties to foreign lobbies, disappeared for 2 days. When he returned, his assistant noticed a change. More jittery, more pale, and more silent. 2 days later, a firewall at the ministry was breached. Traoré ordered a quiet internal investigation. The results were chilling. Cabaret had been compromised. Not by money, but by threats to his family living in Lyon, France. Traoré made a difficult decision. Send them to Bamako. Secretly. Tell Mali to guard them like they were mine. As for Cabaret, he was relieved of his duties but not punished. Not yet. In war, Traoré said, not every traitor chooses betrayal. Some are just held hostage by history. The African Development Forum invited Traoré to Nairobi. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, an economic summit, media fanfare, world leaders in polished suits. But Koita intercepted chatter, a plot to poison his water glass, arranged through a Kenyan caterer on a French payroll. Traoré still attended. He raised his glass for a toast but never drank. Instead, he handed it silently to the summit's French envoy with a smile. To transparency, he said. The man froze. Later that evening, the envoy quietly boarded a private jet back to Europe. He never returned to the continent again. Maman Abe returned from her mission in Togo carrying a gift, a red leather bangle worn by West African queens during war. Inside it, woven invisibly, was a microdrive. It contained the sovereign sphere client list, over 200 names including former presidents, generals, journalists, and businessmen across Africa. Traoré stared at it, silent. We could destroy them all, Zanaba said. But Traoré shook his head. No. We will expose them. A week later, the world watched in disbelief as Burkina Faso's state broadcaster aired a 3-hour documentary titled The Hands Behind the Curtain. It showed real satellite footage, audio logs, financial transfers, espionage routes, and testimonies, connecting sovereign sphere European cartels and corrupt African officials in a web of theft and treason. The final image? A slow zoom on a document labeled Subject, Operation Control via Media Narrative, Traoré Case Study. Nations erupted. Protests broke out in Dakar, Abidjan, and Cotonou. Leaders scrambled to deny. But the people had seen the truth, and it could not be unseen. Traoré returned to the prison compound, where Mercer's body had remained unclaimed. He buried the man in a quiet field, no nameplate, no ceremony. Only a single carving on the gravestone. The sword was not the threat. The hand that wielded it was. Traoré knew, removing one spy didn't stop the storm. But it changed the direction of the wind. In every Burkinabe village, something began to stir. Youth militias began building community gardens, doubling as surveillance points. Women organized watch groups, shielding their districts against foreign agents. Artists painted walls with symbols of resistance. Sankofa birds, lions, spider webs, and Traoré's silhouette beneath a rising sun. The griots began singing again, not of kings long gone, but of one still standing, sword sheathed, gaze forward. A new tale had begun, and the people were ready to write it together. As the dust of revelation settled, Traoré traveled north, to Bani, where desert winds whispered forgotten wisdom. There, a sacred council of Sahelian elders, griots, and spiritual guardians awaited. They had seen kings rise and fall, borders redrawn, and blood offered to foreign gods. The eldest, a woman named Yadise, stepped forward. Her voice was sand and steel. "We saw the shadow behind your eyes, boy. The loneliness of the one who carries fire alone." Traoré bowed his head. "I fear what I must become to protect what we are." She handed him a staff carved with generations of battle chants. "Then don't become anything, Ibrahim. Let the people become with you." It was not just his fight anymore. It was theirs. From a satellite uplink hidden in Mount Tenakura, Traoré addressed the African Union. No teleprompters. No suit and tie. Only his camouflage, a plain chair, and an ancestral spear beside him. "We are not anti-West. We are anti-subjugation. Africa is not a child of chaos. It is a mother of civilization. And we will no longer rent our soul to those who sold us chains." The speech ignited the continent. #AfricaUnbound trended in over 30 countries. Several presidents, formerly puppets, publicly distanced themselves from foreign PMCs. Others scheduled referendums on foreign military bases. Something had shifted. Africa wasn't asking for its future anymore. It was building it. But enemies do not sleep. At dawn, Zinaba detected a signal. A stealth drone, white, unmarked, circling the Ouagadougou presidential compound. Its mission was clear: surveillance or assassination. But Fadil was ready. Using a frequency pulse coded in Fulani flutes, the drone's internal system crashed. It landed silently in the palace courtyard, intact. Inside they found a miniaturized camera, linked directly to a NATO base in Italy. Traoré smiled bitterly. They sent metal to understand a man. They still don't understand Africa breathes through spirit. He ordered the drone repainted red, green, and gold, and mounted above the military academy. A trophy. A warning. Word arrived of a captured agent, a tall woman with icy eyes, caught near the gold mines of Gawa. She claimed to be a Belgian archaeologist, but spoke fluent Hausa and moved like someone trained by elite intelligence. Traoré met her alone. She never gave a name. He asked just one question. "What does your country fear most?" She chuckled. "A continent that no longer whispers." Before she could say more, she bit into a cyanide capsule hidden in her cheek. Dead in seconds. Traoré stared down at her body, feeling not triumph but clarity. Their greatest weapon was no longer steel or money. It was fear of Africa awakening. Weeks passed. But General Farouk, the traitor who once conspired with Mercer, was still missing. Some claimed he'd fled to Europe. Others whispered of a secret arrest. Then one night, in a national broadcast, a shadowy figure was shown sitting silently behind a courtroom desk. His face revealed. General Farouk. Tried publicly for high treason. But Traoré didn't push for execution. He chose exile. Let him live where he cannot rule. Let his silence be louder than a martyr's death. It was justice with teeth, not blood. In every village, Traoré's administration began distributing solar-powered video kits to youth. "Film your truth," the instructions read. No matter how small. What began as simple footage of goats, family meals, and dance rituals turned into a movement. Children filmed broken infrastructure, polluted rivers, mistreated workers, and unexplained troop movements. The government responded. Roads were paved. Corrupt mayors ousted. Foreign projects halted. Burkina Faso had birthed a new intelligence agency. The People's Eye. At a climate summit in Geneva, Traoré faced a panel of Western diplomats. One British minister leaned in, smirking. "You've destabilized the region, Mr. President." Traoré replied evenly. "You destabilized it the day you drew our borders with a ruler and not a soul." Gasp. The room fell quiet. Later, in private, the same minister offered Traoré a security partnership. He refused. Africa does not need partners who carry daggers in their smiles. With Mali and Guinea, Traoré signed the People's Sovereignty Pact, a mutual protection treaty not just of military force but of media independence, land rights over natural resources, youth-led councils, Ancestral culture preservation. The final clause? All three leaders swore a vow on ancestral soil, each pouring water over the grave of a shared Sahelian elder. Not for power, they declared together, but for future generations. On the eve of Independence Day, Burkina held a national blackout. No lights. No music. Only fire pits in every village. Old men and women told stories of the empire before slavery, the singers before silence, the names erased by maps. Traoré sat among orphans and farmers, sharing roasted millet, listening like a student. He wasn't president that night. He was Ibrahim, son of Faso. And in the dark, Africa remembered herself. In a small box beneath Traoré's bed was a letter. Unopened. Inside. Addressed. To the next one who carries this weight. It contained advice, warnings, and a poem. You will feel alone. That means you are at the front. You will hear betrayal. That means you've gone deep. You will feel watched. That means you've scared them. But if you feel loved by the soil, then you have not led. You have risen. He smiled, folded the letter again and put it back. Not yet. One day, as if scripted by fate, a new envoy from Europe arrived. Young. Naive. Idealistic. He tried charm, then politics, then threats. What will it take for us to rebuild trust? He asked. Traoré stared at him and said, leave us alone long enough. To build something you'll have to earn your way into. From Fadil's secure system came the last encrypted report. Sovereign sphere dismantled. European shareholders arrested. NATO denies involvement. New PMCs attempting rebrand. But beneath the data was a single line of prophecy. They will come again. In new coats. New masks. But now we know the smell of the hunter. Traoré stood at the edge of the Ouagadougou palace roof. Sunset. Children's voices in the distance. A drumbeat rising not from war but from joy. Burkina Faso was no utopia. It had problems. Hunger. Drought. Memory. But it had found something stronger than money. Stronger than weapons. It had found clarity. And in the growing dark, one man stood straight, not as a ruler but as a reminder. That when the soil remembers your name, no foreign shadow can unwrite your story.